Comfort items. Comfort items like blankets, stuffed animals, or worn-out pillows are objects that provide emotional security. British psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott studied them extensively in the 1950s and called them transitional objects because they help children move from total dependence on a parent toward independence. Most kids form attachments to these items around 8 months old. The attachment usually fades by age 5 or 6. But when childhood involves neglect, these objects take on a much bigger role that can last into adulthood. The blanket or stuffed animal becomes a replacement for the consistent comfort that they could not get from a parent. Adults who experience childhood trauma often sleep with a specific pillow or keep a childhood toy nearby. Some feel intense distress when separated from these items even briefly. Therapists have noticed these attachments tend to be strongest in people whose childhood environments were chaotic or emotionally cold. The comfort item becomes a source of safety, something that cannot abandon them or suddenly change its behavior. Many adults feel embarrassed about these attachments, but it's just the brain doing its best to cope when certain emotional needs weren't met in childhood. People-pleasing on autopilot. People-pleasing as a trauma response is the automatic habit of putting the needs of others before your own. Therapist Pete Walker popularized it in the early 2000s as the fawn response, adding it to the classic fight, flight, and freeze reactions. This pattern usually develops in homes where a child's safety depended on keeping a caregiver calm or happy. Kids in these situations learn fast that their own needs come second, and that expressing those needs might lead to punishment or conflict. The behavior becomes so automatic that it runs below conscious awareness. Adults with this pattern often say yes before they have even thought about whether they want to. They apologize constantly, over-explain their decisions, and feel physically anxious when someone looks unhappy. Studies show that people who grew up with emotional neglect or unpredictable parents are much more likely to become people-pleasers later on. Overreacting to mild criticism. Rejection-sensitive dysphoria, or RSD, means having a big emotional response to feedback most people would shrug off. This happens because the brain's threat detection system develops during childhood. When kids grow up with harsh or constant criticism, the brain learns to treat all negative feedback as danger. The amygdala, the brain's alarm center, becomes hypersensitive. A casual comment from a coworker can trigger the same rush of stress hormones that a parent's anger once caused. UCLA researchers found in 2012 that people with childhood emotional abuse showed heightened amygdala activation when they saw disapproving facial expressions. The reaction often feels completely out of proportion, even to the person experiencing it. A boss saying, "This needs revisions," might trigger hours of resentment or defensive anger. People with RSD often develop one of two coping strategies. They become people-pleasers who scan every interaction for potential disapproval, or they avoid situations entirely where they might face criticism. Thumb-sucking. Thumb-sucking is one of the earliest stress responses humans develop, typically beginning in the womb. Most children stop between the ages of 2 and 4 as they develop other coping skills. But when childhood involves constant stress or lack of comfort from parents, the behavior can stick around much longer or come back during stressful times. Thumb-sucking releases endorphins and activates the body's rest and digest system. For kids who did not get consistent comfort from adults, thumb-sucking becomes a reliable way to calm down that does not depend on anyone else. Pediatric studies show that children in foster care or those who experienced early neglect have higher rates of prolonged thumb-sucking. Adults, on the other hand, may unconsciously return to it when triggered by stressful situations or as a way of relaxing before falling asleep. The CPTSD Foundation has documented many cases of trauma survivors who continue the behavior into adulthood, describing it as providing a feeling of numb security. Laughing during serious or painful moments. Laughing during serious moments, or nervous laughter, is an involuntary body response that happens during overwhelming situations. Researchers documented this in trauma survivors as early as the 1960s. The laughter does not mean the person finds anything funny. It's just the nervous system trying to release tension when the real emotional response feels too dangerous. Children who grew up in homes where showing sadness or fear leads to punishment learn to suppress those feelings. But the brain still needs to discharge that energy somehow, so it chooses laughter as a safer option. This serves as an emotional shield. It creates distance from the pain and makes tough conversations feel more manageable. However, it often creates problems in relationships or therapy. Others might think the person doesn't take their trauma seriously or is making light of difficult topics. But in reality, the laughter often indicates the opposite. The topic is so painful that their brain is throwing everything it has at the problem just to keep functioning. Memory gaps from childhood. People who experience trauma often can't remember large portions of their childhood. Sigmund Freud first wrote about this as early as the 1890s. While limited memories from before age 3 or 4 are normal because of brain development, gaps that stretch into later childhood or erase specific periods are often connected to trauma. The brain can block access to memories that are too painful to process. This happens especially when trauma occurred repeatedly over time. The hippocampus, which handles memory formation, gets affected by chronic stress hormones leading to fragmented memories. Adults with these gaps often say their childhood feels like it happened to someone else. They might notice others remember shared events they have no memory of at all. These gaps can be especially frustrating when trying to piece together personal history or understand current emotional patterns. Trauma therapy can help people gradually access some of these memories, though the goal is usually to process the emotions rather than recover every detail. Nail biting or skin picking. Nail biting and skin picking are repetitive behaviors that work as self-regulation tools. They often start in childhood as responses to anxiety or lack of parental attention, but can get carried into adulthood as coping mechanisms for stressful situations. The connection to trauma comes from what these behaviors accomplish emotionally. Picking or biting creates a small, controllable pain that can distract from larger, uncontrollable emotional pain. It gives the person something to focus on, and something they can control when everything else feels chaotic. Some describe it as a release valve for tension they don't know how to express any other way. Picking or biting often happens automatically, sometimes without the person noticing until they see blood or feel soreness. This dissociative quality is part of what makes the behavior so hard to stop, as the person isn't fully present while it's happening. Rocking back and forth to relax. Rocking back and forth is a self-soothing behavior that mimics the motion babies experience in the womb. It's also the same motion parents use to calm infants, swaying them until they fall asleep. The back and forth movement triggers the brain to release calming chemicals, creating the feeling of relaxation. For children who didn't get enough physical comfort, rocking becomes a main way to self-regulate. It provides a consistent rhythm that calms the nervous system without relying on another person. Adults who rock to self-soothe usually do it privately, often while sitting at a desk or lying in bed during moments of high anxiety. The behavior can be so automatic, people do not realize they are doing it until someone points it out. While rocking is sometimes linked to autism, it is also a common response to early chronic stress. The body is using one of its earliest methods to relax itself. This behavior often gets misunderstood. Someone who rocks during a difficult conversation might seem like they're not paying attention, while in reality, the rocking is actually helping them stay more present. Avoiding conflict at all costs. One of the most common trauma responses is avoiding conflict. This means going to extreme lengths to prevent any disagreement from happening. The behavior ties directly to childhood environment where conflict was dangerous or led to violence, abandonment threats, or prolonged silent treatment. Children in these homes learn that disagreement is not safe. They get hyper-aware of signs of brewing conflict and develop strategies to diffuse tension before it grows. This often means changing subjects, agreeing with opinions they do not actually hold, or disappearing when anger shows up. The pattern sticks because during childhood, it was a working survival strategy. In adulthood, on the other hand, this can create big problems. People might stay in toxic relationships because leaving would mean a confrontation. They might agree to things they resent or suppress their needs until they eventually explode. The irony is that avoiding all conflict usually creates more of it down the road, as resentment builds and relationships suffer from a lack of honest communication. Research consistently shows that healthy conflict resolution, not avoidance, leads to healthy and longer relationships. For those who learned early that conflict equals danger, unlearning this takes time and gradual proof that disagreement can actually be safe. If you enjoyed this video, you're gonna love this next one. Thanks for watching.